Welcome to the Bounce Back Generation podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Dhillon.
I'm glad that you're joining me today because this is a topic that has been kind of freaking me out. I feel like we're living in a time when we don't know what's real. And I want you to think about that while you tell the audience who you are. I know that you're an adjunct professor.
Yeah. It's actually adjunct instructor. So to be completely accurate, since we want to be accurate.
Yes. We want to get our information right. Tell me about some of the classes. Well, tell me before you became a professor what you did.
I graduated from UC San Diego with English and American Lit and went into journalism and got a master's at Cal, where we met once upon a time, many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then worked for daily newspapers for 10 years, covering everything from homeless issues to the NBA. And wound up as an music editor at Creative Loafing, which is an alternative weekly, now full-time there since 2015. Even when I had that last year of my job at Charlotte Viewpoint, I was still teaching 4 classes. And they include the rise and fall of traditional news media. That's probably the one we're going to most relevant to our discussion today. Intro to journalism, writing about the arts and culture, making a magazine in the digital age, and a couple of American studies classes, popular culture in the American music scene, and the Vietnam War and American culture. Well, that's it. That's what I teach.
They're great. I don't know what to do about it, but it's so difficult right now to know how to consume information. Not just the news, but it's like we're being like inundated with just data. I don't think there's ever in a time in human history when we've had so much information attacking, or hitting us, I don't know if it's attacking. And how do we know what's real? And like I said, I think that's the hardest question to answer. But if we start looking at that question, I think we'll unravel it easier than try to be like, well, here's how you should consume the news.
Yeah, I mean, I have to come at it kind of from that standpoint more than any, like, I don't know enough about AI, generation and stuff, to come at it from sort of the, coders side of things, how to sort of track provenance, which is going to be a huge deal. Somehow AI has to have something in it that shows the provenance, where you can trace it back to.
Right. So provenance is like, where did it come from? Where's the original piece of information coming from?
Yes.
Right.
I'll give you, for instance, how this played out recently. Was an excellent student in my American Studies class. She did an excellent job on media and in the 70s media, but and she had like excellent quotes and sourcing on it, and then she had clips from a couple of films and people discussing the importance of when people began to lose trust in the government and stuff like that. And she had this clip from a magazine from the 70s called The Economic Revelator. So I clicked on it and I was like, oh, I haven't heard about this magazine. And it was
an
this
actual
little
link in her.
Yes, she had links to other ones that were all real, people talking and stuff. And this Economic Revelator was, this had a sort of very professional voice. This magazine helped change the 70s, their investigative reporting. I lived in the 70s, sadly, that old. Pretty political, read a lot of that kind of stuff. And I thought maybe there was something like a Mother Jones, which started in that era, because that's what it sounded like. So I looked up economic relevance, and I looked it up everywhere. I Googled that stuff hard and long and went way deep on that. It just didn't exist. There's no such thing.
So how did she get?
And it was on the internet. It was on YouTube. And she took it and placed it among these real things, right? And it sounds real. So here's the scary, was that if it had not been for a 64-year-old dude who was around then, who teaches the subject matter and knows it pretty inside out, I'd never heard of it. She is under the assumption that it exists and was a thing alongside Watergate and, all that other stuff that happened in the 70s. So that's the big fear. Most people aren't going to have time to do that or even interest, probably, right? Right now we're in a situation where we want to confirm our beliefs mostly. That's kind of, we all sort of read and watch to go, that's what I've been thinking. And so that, one of the things I talk about in the traditional news media class is when there was less media, right? Less of what we were just talking about, that fire hose of data just constantly coming at you. When there was less of that, and we all kind of gathered around the same media, when we were in that era, we shared the commonality of that, the facts. We all kind of sort of agreed about the basic facts. There were always people who questioned the moon landing, or, skeptics. And that's healthy for society to have that. But when we all consume sort of the same media, and there are problems with that, I'm not naive, and we all know, it was basically curated by older white men. Right. That's the huge problem. And media itself has contributed to this.
Why do they contribute to it? Why are media outlets not coming to the same conclusion about facts? Or are they, and they're manipulating the facts for their own purposes?
Well, it's not. It's right out in the open. It's not a conspiracy. People of a conspiratorial bent think, they're there to deceive us. It's all about this. There we go. That's the money sign. And because these are publicly traded, profit making in industries now, the not publicly funded, not those, NPR, PBS, whatever, those are a little different, BBC, and they operate on a different manner. And I have my students compare a NBC or ABC or CBS nightly news program from the same day as a PBS NewsHour. And I usually get the exact same response, which is, I learned a lot more in the PBS NewsHour. They're much calmer and quieter, and people discuss things in a quiet fashion, and they dive a lot deeper. Obviously, they have more time. But it was too long, and I was bored. And the other one goes faster and has music and graphics, and so the publicly traded, the private news media in the world, which is most of it, they know that, and they have to make money. And there are a few kind of outlets that are sort of above it, New York Times and the Post and the Wall Street Journal, let's say, right? Newspaper wise, their reputations are such that they don't have to totally play that game. But television, especially, and cable news in particular, plays that game, and they have to make profit. And I can give you two quick examples. One, which I just showed my students yesterday, was the Malaysian airliner that vanished, and 2014, and the CNN's ratings, they were in third place on cable news at the time. Their ratings were tanking, so they went all in on this, and they did like 24/7 coverage. It's a missing airplane. Once you've discussed possible, engine failure, captain going nuts or whatever, or storm or whatever, there's nothing there. It's speculation. And unfortunately, there was one anchor in particular who started inviting, he had people on, he literally brought up black holes. And if you know science, there's no black hole over the Indian Ocean. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an Indian Ocean or an Earth. The Bermuda Triangle effect, and the TV show Lost. And at the very end, he said, why not bring in a psychic? And actually, what's interesting is CNN did this by posting tweets that the audience had asked.
So then it's not us, it's the audience asking. We're just answering.
Yeah. And the thing is like in journalism in the old days anyway, and again, it was a far from perfect system. You curated that shit out, right? Because scientifically, there's no possible way there's a black hole, right? It never even got into the mainstream bloodstream. Just pure bullshit. Pure fakery would not get in there because it's not valid, right? You're free to believe it. We live in a free country. You can believe whatever the hell you want. But from this curation standpoint, no. So we use that. I use that. And the other one I use is the infamous Jeff Zucker interview with, I think it was the New York Times Magazine, when Donald Trump was elected.
And Jeff Zucker is the former head of CNN, correct?
Yes. And
not to be confused with the other Zuckerberg, who is also an issue.
Zuckerman was, and here's the part that, of course, a lot of people might say, oh, sound like a conspiracy. He was also the producer on The Apprentice. Yeah. So everybody's like, oh, right. Well, he basically, he basically said that in this interview is that Donald Trump is great for ratings. And when he became president in 2015, and when he was running, and when he became, all of the cable news network ratings rose. And they're profit making. And so they focused on him. And he got this free platform, which any politician can have. But what is it? Why this works is because he is essentially sort of a walking scandal. And he's anybody who thinks he's not smart about media is underestimating.
Yeah, he knows.
I think he's kind of a idiot savant or a genius about it, one or the other. He's super smart about this. And he knows I'm going to say crazy shit or, push the envelope, say things that people, and I'm sure he believes some of it. And some of it is fakery and bluster, but it drives ratings.
Yeah.
And so it got into the bloodstream. It got in the bloodstream with the birtherism in 2012, thanks to certain news outlet that was like, ooh, our ratings are going up just by saying this stuff. And we don't.
Talking about news.
Yeah, and they have a partisan agenda, just like MSNBC has one. I mean, anybody who says they don't, come on.
I think everybody does, and yeah.
I don't actually. I actually don't. I don't believe that. I think certain news media are essentially above it. And I don't mean that they succeed all the time, but they are not. I have friends on the left who think the New York Times is literally like part of the machine oppressing us. Yeah. They firmly, all right. And we've talked a little bit about that. I don't believe it. I'm not saying.
I think the Washington Post is now too. Actually, you had mentioned. Let me tell you what the new logo for the Washington Post, which was after Trump won number one term, it was "Democracy Dies in Darkness," and now it is. Let me see if I can find it. Now I sent it to myself.
Oh, it's so sad. There's a reason for this.
Here it is. Riveting storytelling for all of America. So you go from Democracy Dies in Darkness, which was an agenda that was very clear, that we are here to defend democracy with the truth, right? Or with good information. And it is now flipped to, we're here to tell you stories that everybody's going to be okay with. And Jeff Bezos said directly, what we want to do is get the MAGA folks into reading the Washington Post.
Well, what is the New York Times?
Nothing wrong with that, but storytelling to me is you're going to tell them the story that they want to hear, because that's what drives the money and that's what drives the politics. And you create a loop, which is what X has done as well. I have an agenda as Elon Musk, and I'm going to use this platform to promote this agenda. And it was very, very effective at getting Trump elected.
Yeah, the $230 million or whatever he donated didn't hurt either.
Plus the money.
What is the New York Times motto?
All the news that's fit to print.
Exactly. Boom.
That's a good one.
What that says is all the news that's fit to print. Now, you can argue about what's fit to print, but what I was just talking about, psychics, black holes, stuff that is obviously wrong, doesn't get in, right? There are other things that didn't get in. That I think is a valid complaint about especially the major news media. And that has changed. I mean, if you look at the editorial board for the New York Times, it's representative of America. There's 4 or 5 out of 20 people, there's 4 or 5 African Americans, a couple of Asian people, young, old. I mean, relatively young, old. It's not TikTok young, but it's, but it looks like America, basically, right? Adult America. Let's put it that way. And, this editorial board's not the same as a newsroom, but I just having worked in newsrooms and having watched the collaborative and editing process, what happens is you write a story, it goes in and it gets looked at by other people who are not you and don't, if you're a good journalist, you're trying to be fair and objective and balanced as right. I mean, I tell my students, a good journalist is like a juror on a trial. You've got opinions, you've got beliefs, but you sit in there and you try to put them in the back a little bit and look at the evidence. Is this person guilty or not? Right? And a preponderance, and we all want simple black and white answers, but we know sometimes, bad people get off and good people go to jail, for instance, right? So it's not a perfect system, but it is sort of, that's the ideal. So if you're a good journalist, you go in trying to do those things. So as if you tilt one way or the other and you come into the newsroom, you have editors who are going to say, they're not going to be exactly the same as you. And they're going to say, hey, this leans a little this. And I had that happen with the homeless issues that I was writing about at Daily Cal. And those were students, basically. And, I was like, you're going a little, and it's Berkeley and Daily Cal. So I was leaning too far to the left.
The UC Berkeley.
I let some personal feelings about this get in there. And they took it out or modified it a little. And afterwards, like, yeah, that's journalism. It looks like more of a news story. And I know philosophically there's really no such thing as objectivity, but it's something to aim at. And these are all imperfect things. But as we were talking about, once upon a time, we were able to agree on the essential facts of being alive in the world today. And now that's kind of, going by the wayside, and AI is going to gin that up.
Well, let's put that. Let's talk about that in a sec, but I want to tell you what I think is so confusing to people. I agree with you. I think that there are a lot of really great journalists out there. They're doing the best they can. I think I listen to Fox or watch Fox News sometimes because I want to see what's going on. Sometimes they have some great journalists there, I have to say. Do very sharp, analysis. Same thing at the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal too has some great people on there. The problem is that you funnel that through. You talk about they go to the editors and all that, and then there's the money people and there's the owners. And when you have oligarchical owners or you have corporate owners, what they do is very insidious because they take that really good journalism and then they don't necessarily change the stories that much, but they change the headline. And for 99.9% of the people, we are going to look at the headline, and the headline is going to tell us what the story is going to be about, and it's going to slant it. So the difference between, man was found guilty of X crime is different than saying, court persecuted this, individual, which is a lot of what we're getting. It's that little twist so that it's you're the victim, you're the victor. It's very much setting people against each other, and I think it's very hard to write headlines that are kind of straightforward. But that's what people consume. People consume the headlines. They consume the thumbnail now is the thing. Everybody wants a thumbnail where someone's going, oh my God, like we get more hits if there's a thumbnail with me going than we do if there's just me, kind of like listening and, caring. So
sure. That's why my students are bored with the PBS NewsHour, even though they learn. They always say the same thing. I learned a lot, but I was bored. And I have a clip that I use from the Daily Show where they have an editor, Nietzsche, somebody or other, I can't remember his last name, from Gawker, right? And they were infamous for and he said, Jordan Klepper was interviewing him, and he said, I spend 20, 30 minutes on the headline and 5 minutes on the story.
Yes.
And that's reversed journalism. And we do that, and newspapers are more, or any news outlet, CNN, whoever, they're all more susceptible to that now, because that's what gets engagement online, and everything goes. My students, when I do a survey, about maybe 10% of them subscribe. They're all getting through their news feed. And to get the hits, to get the ad money, because these are publicly traded private companies, this is the game you have to play. And the interesting thing is, this is not new. If you go back to the penny press era, the 1800s, and when sensationalism and yellow journalism started, this was the paper version of today's digital. Was you had to jack up the headlines, right? That's how Hearst started a war. The sinking of the U.S. Maine in Havana was like, all those dastardly Spanish. Nobody knew the cause, but he's like, the famous quote that Citizen Kane used was, "You bring me the prose and I'll bring you the war," because it was benefited him circulation wise. So when you have a profit making machine, it has to make a profit, and your owners, and this is where we get into this real, when you have a good owner. Bezos was praised for the first 10 years at the Post for not interfering, right? He had some really stupid ass ideas about trying to boost circulation. It's just recently that, and because they're watching their financial ads. He's got government contracts, and that's why you don't want billionaire owners. That's why you don't want them. And that's why I argue, and I'm probably in a definite minority here, for government-funded news organizations like the CNBC in Canada, like the BBC. And it's worth noting that, people hear that and think, oh, they're going to be controlled by the government. What are you watching right now?
Yeah, who's controlling
Bezos, Zuckerberg, all these media moguls are, they see which way the wind is blowing, and they are fully on board because of their financial commitments and what's at stake financially.
Well, yeah, I think it's a little bit deeper than that, because what I think what Jeff Bezos is reacting to is how much power Elon Musk has. And I think what people don't realize is, when you have that kind of money, they have a lot of money. Yes, they care about the bottom line, but they're not thinking, I'm going to make money from Amazon. They're already making money from Amazon and from Tesla and from X and all of that stuff. I don't know if he's making money from X. But what they really, really want is control of the government and the big $1 trillion contracts that they can get to get their rockets in the sky.
Yes, you're right. And that's kind of what I meant, is they don't want to offend him because he holds grudges. He will screw your business. You say the wrong thing. So they're all kissing the ring, a losing game.
Yeah. So let's get away from the politics and let's get back to the information. I think it's all relevant. So let's lay out a little timeline. This is how I'm seeing it, so that we can kind of break it down for people who are listening. So I think at the beginning of a news story, you have what you call provenance. Provenance means, where did that information start? And by determining the provenance, then you can get to the real nitty-gritty of, is this real? Is this true? Is this information reliable? And then you have on the other end that we've talked about, which is, how do you package that in a way that then manipulates people into thinking different things? So what I want to get at is, what happens in between? How can I, as a consumer of information, get to that provenance question answered and not be manipulated on the other end by the headline or the thumbnail and we haven't even talked about the psychology, which we can talk about in a little bit, the psychology of why we want things to be controversial. Why do we want to fight each other? It is fun.
Yeah. Let's get in an argument at the end of this.
Yes. Okay. Well, if we fought here,
boost your rating.
Exactly. If we had a big ass fight, maybe we should do a thumbnail where I'm yelling at you and you're yelling at me or something.
You know,
Yeah,
you know, you know what an
that.
you know what an old saying is in journalism that precedes. It goes back to the penny press era, frankly, and you know this. You've heard this before. If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
Because people zoom in on that. The little lizard part of our brain. I don't mean to jump right to the psychology part, but that's what's happening. Is the little lizard part of our brain, which is never probably maybe we'll evolve it, but it's still here now. Always looks at the shiny silver ball, and it's usually sex or violence. I mean, anything related to those two things, we go, right? Oh, Kim Kardashian did what?
Yeah.
Celebrity's another part of this. We love watching celebrities rise and fall because they're suddenly they're fallible. Their foibles show. But all right, to get to from this sort of idealistic version to how we ended up today. So was that what you asked me?
Well, how do we get from not historically, how do we consume information so that we can get to that provenance where this information came from and assure ourselves that it's true and real? And how do we combat the fact that we're going to be fed stuff that is going to psychologically mess with us so that we do certain things like vote a certain way or buy a certain product or hate somebody that we probably wouldn't hate if we knew them in real life,
Sure. Yeah. That's most hatred is of people you've never met. Just
well, I hate people. No, I hate it. I say this, I don't even hate Trump. I feel like or any politician, I feel sorry for people, but they're hurting us and I think they should be stopped. So
yes. I'd prefer to have someone else there who's not as angry and stuff. Well, let me give you something I tell my students. Journalism for the 20th century, basically. Let's just put a picket fence around this. The idea was transparency. So you would read a story or you'd see Walter Cronkite talk about it, and they would source it, right? They would say, according to White House officials, or according to the Better Business Bureau, or right. So you would see, and this is my big argument is always about media literacy. It's like, yes, our main outlets are not as good as it could be, but in general, I read Times and I read it and I trust most of what I'm seeing as it occurred, right? And the transparency was here is the sourcing for our story. And it's kind of interesting if you go to, PolitiFact, the Poynter Institute thing that kind of judges whether this is true or not.
Can you explain why we should trust PolitiFact? You said the Poynter Institute. Tell us.
Yeah, they watch journalism and obviously, hence the name, they kind of focus on politics. So I go there all the time. It's a great place to learn. I'll give you an example. A statistical a meme went around in 2016 from the San Francisco Crime Bureau that showed that 81% of murders of whites were committed by blacks. And so anybody who, reads the news and is sort of cognizant and not wanting to believe something like that, knew that number feels off. So PolitiFact goes, and that was just one number in the chart, but that was obviously the point of the chart, right? Was to stir up racial fear, right? Little dog whistle time. So this was 2016. So that thing was passed around on Facebook like crazy, right? During the election. Passed around also by somebody trying to get into office. I'll leave you to figure out who that was. And, just posted on Facebook at the time, or X, one or the other. Anyway, or Twitter as it was then. So it felt wrong. So if you go to the PolitiFact site about that, it gets a pants on fire. This is just a flat out lie. And then they have like a middle one. There's some truth in here, and then, this is totally true, right? Controversial statements by people. And they have the same, Elizabeth Warren gets, not a lot. She gets a few pants on fires for completely exaggerating some statistic, right? So they are pretty, unbiased, right? Or they point this truth finder at both people. Both parties. So, and again, it's only politics, really, right? If you want to go to find out in internet stuff, Snopes.com
Nope.
is
SNP.
great for debunking, I heard Hillary's got, some has cancer
Right.
or Hillary has killed a bunch of people. Right. And you go to Snopes and they do the same thing, which is they source, here's why this isn't true. And they source, links. That's the great thing about the digital age is you can start to trace provenance.
Right.
And that used to be done inside the story, according to quotations, Ronald Reagan said, whatever. They used to be done inside the story. Now it's done through links and all this other stuff. It requires a little more work to do that. That's why I prefer to trust.
Why should, don't I need to know who is behind PolitiFacts, who is behind Snopes? Because they could be cherry picking the links. Shouldn't I research even deeper? So so I read a story and I say, that looks strange that 80% of murders of white people are committed by blacks, right? Okay, I don't know if that's true. I'm going to go to PolitiFact. And you said it's the Poynter Institute. Who are they? Shouldn't I investigate that?
They do. Yeah. Well, you can keep going down this rabbit hole till you're talking to the person who did it, right? To the one person who did it. And this is the big kind of dilemma of our age, is that nobody has the time to do that, first of all. But we distrust everything. Now everybody, that's what I was talking about earlier. We all kind of trusted that we were basically getting the facts from news outlets. Now nobody trusts anybody, right? Everybody questions everything. And that only, if you don't have that level of trust, the idea of a democracy is kind of doomed, I think. You either have that level of trust, you have people playing fair and trying to behave in a civically responsible way. They're humans. They're not going to be perfect. That's why a group of curators is better than one person curating. But I can talk about that idea of transparency. I can't answer that question. The Poynter Institute are people who look at journalism and point out its flaws, right? And they're
like a nonprofit or something that does that.
Yeah, but much more along those lines. They're not a think. They're sort of a watchdog of journalism manned by journalists. So that's why I use them, right?
Okay.
So I kind of trust that they are going to be acting in good faith as best they can. And that's the thing, this good faith thing. We have someone in power who doesn't believe in it, doesn't care about it, and his loyalty and fealty matter more than good faith. And this is a long process, arguably started with LBJ and Nixon. LBJ for being a stool pigeon for the military about the success of Vietnam. Pentagon Papers. Actually, if you go back to that era, after Pentagon Papers and Watergate, news media has 72% approval rating, Gallup polls. 72%. Right? That doesn't mean they all love it, but they believe in it. They agree it. And the slide down has been since then. Part of that was what we call issues fatigue. People just got tired of bad news and learning that the government that we all used to believe in, kind of, right? Not all, but most white Americans did. They found out, oh shit, they're not telling us the truth about really important things.
Well, I started losing faith when I learned that, when I observed that we were going into Iraq based on weapons of mass destruction, and there was plenty of evidence that this wasn't true, that they were developing weapons of mass destruction, but the papers were pretty strong on, we have to go in.
Mass media failed at epic level. That's arguably their lowest moment, in my opinion. And it was kind of weirdly like it is now. The winds of, and there's a Bill Moyers documentary about this, totally worth watching.
What's it called?
Fighting the War.
Buying the
It's
war.
only about 50 minutes. Yeah, it's not very long, or maybe it's 80 minutes. But it's so in depth on this, and he talks to a few reporters. The Knight Ridder chain was the best because they weren't in the belt. They weren't in the beltway. They were kind of sort of outsiders. And these guys were questioning the facts. And unfortunately for the New York Times, Judith Miller was their connection to Cheney. He was a source for her, and an anonymous source often. And the New York Times ran a big front page apology, which is, the second page of the New York
Explain
Times.
Judith Miller and what she did. You have to,
Yes, sorry.
Assume that people don't know. Aren't as
Yes,
old
I know.
as you.
And believe me, I have this problem in my class. I'll be talking. I realize they don't.
Yeah.
They're not as old as you are, John. Judith Miller was the New York Times main reporter on the build-up to the Iraq War. She was a decorated reporter. She had been a good reporter. And she was leaked information out of the vice president's office that said that Saddam Hussein was looking for yellow cake of uranium. And the problem was Dick Cheney was cherry picking information from the intelligence community, right? There were a few, like 5% of the people were saying, 95% were telling him, no, nothing is going on, right? Or I don't know the exact number, 75, 25, whatever. But preponderance of intel was that Saddam's been neutered, right? I mean, he's a jerk. He's a murderous jerk, but he's not Anyway, so she took this great scoop, because that's what it was, great scoop. They published it in the New York Times, and this is a famous story. Jon Stewart actually named this. This is what you do when you're pulling a Miller. Cheney went on the Sunday morning talk shows that people used to watch and pointed to the New York Times and said, well, the New York Times is reporting today that he's getting uranium. It's like, dude,
we better go in.
Are the source of that story, and it's BS.
Yeah.
And she should have, and the New York Times talked about this later. It was a failure of editors and a failure by her, and she was let go at some point. Her contract ended, and they did not renew it. She ended up as a Fox News contributor.
Yeah.
Not entirely surprised.
Well, the second thing I think where they failed historically was in predicting or letting us know or warning us about the financial crash of 2008 with all of the mortgages. That was also a knowable, reportable fact. And I don't know why people didn't.
I'm going to halfway disagree with you here. Not entirely, but this goes to the heart of the matter. The financial crash in 29 is also one of the, this is the book I use for that. Can you read it?
Yeah, Watergate's Legacy.
It's a historical look at investigative journalism. And he mentions the 4 underreported stories. Race is the biggest one. And the financial collapse of 1929 is the
29.
other.
I was talking about 2008.
What? Yeah, and I think that there were more warning signs in 2007 and 8, or actually through the 2000s. But the problem is, and I have this discussion with my students, those stories are dull. They are not exciting stories, right? They're like very arcane, very minutiae of, prime loans getting, it's hard to quants. They have quants do this stuff. And which are like, math wizards, right? Because it's very complicated. So those stories were there, but they didn't capture our attention. This kind of goes back to this, my argument, or not argument, my final thing I say to my students is that we have to, in a democracy, we have to take a step towards engagement with stories that are just not entertaining, right? On that level, on the level that we like, that don't scratch our little lizard brains or that we can laugh at. We have to make a step towards it, because that's where those stories were. They were out there, but it's just not exciting. You saw the movie The Big Short?
Yes.
About it?
Great movie.
Exactly. Entertaining as hell, and I finally understood it. It's like, now I kind of understand. This is that issue.
Michael Lewis, who is a famous author, who he talked about former reporter. He knows how to take a very complicated story, and he has lots of these, and turn them into a book, and then turn them into a movie where we can all understand it. Yes. Why can't journalists? I mean, is that part of what journalists should be learning in journalism school? Is how to be entertaining and how to break things down using graphs and video. And I mean, I go to social media and I get a lot of news from social media, just like a lot of people do now, because they do it in a way that's really interesting. It'll be like, hey, don't scroll. Did you hear what happened today? Congress met and they I just watched something earlier today where I was scrolling, and this you could tell she's like a congressional aide, and she's whispering into the microphone going, you have to pay attention to the bills they're writing. Don't just pay attention to the ones today. They're writing a bunch that are really bad, and that made me kind of, I want to know what's going on in Congress. What are they doing? So what is wrong with doing that? And we better, because if nobody's watching and all we're doing is being sold to fight each other in order to watch stuff, we're kind of doomed. So why?
You bring up a good point. I mean, I'm old, and I'm young at heart, but I'm an old person, and I had grown up with reading, right? Mm-hmm. And that was my window into everything, right? I'll give you an example. The fires, I got a little heated about the reaction by some people who don't live in California. And so I broke out my Cadillac Desert book. I don't know if you ever read that in college. That was big when because it was so well.
I might have read it. Yeah. So Cadillac Desert is about the water wars in California. Why California has water the way it is. It's a complex thing again. Yeah. Turn into a great narrative.
Right. But it is a long narrative. Mm-hmm. And it's not easily digested. And so when I hear people saying, well, why don't they just do this or that? There are no pat answers. These are very complicated stories. And if you can make an entertaining version of that, you should. And I think, to get to your point without going down the fire thing, although basically what I'll say is there are fires in California because there are too many people in California. And it's a land that's not meant, that's the upshot of that. They're just not meant to, be people building on those mesas and hills. They have burned for, centuries, eons. Yeah, that's how nature takes care of itself. Anyway, I use Daily Show clips, and there was always this big argument. The Daily Show guys, we're not journalists. We're not journalists. We're not journalists. You ended up kind of being journalists because you're more entertaining than watching, Walter Cronkite or, I feel bad because I like Nora O'Donnell. But the CBS anchor. I'd rather watch them talk about it because I'm going to be laughing. But their argument was always, the show is better, the jokes are funnier if you have the basic knowledge of the news of the day. So at the end of the day, I still think that one kernel of stepping towards news, that's what we used to do. I mean, if you watch those old Walter Cronkite things, it's very dry, but an entire nation turned to this, this way of delivering the news. And it was not perfect. I'm not arguing that at all, but we had a consensus largely that, this is how we digest news. And it's not supposed to be exciting. And this happened in the 70s. It became part of the entertainment wing of these big media companies. And that's the other text I use. It's my former dean. My former dean, Pentagon Papers. Big deal. This is a 2005 version, and he's complaining about the 50 media companies going down to 5, which is relevant to what we're discussing. And I still use this because there are still only 5 or 6, depending on if you count Comcast, big media companies. And then there's an issue of whether, we should include X or Facebook as media companies. Or I should say Twitter. Sorry, Twitter.
I think they are not media companies. They are holders of our data companies. And that's, I think, if they're going to hold my data, they should pay me for it, particularly if I'm creating entertainment that gets people to watch so that they can sell advertising. They're using me and my persona and my data to sell advertising so they can make money. And if you're really good at it, they'll throw you a few bucks your way.
Right. But what about the news outlets who are providing 80 to 90% of the original reporting, all the news that you see on the feeds? That's still generated or paid for basically by mainstream media, by legacy media. I mean, because they're paying, and we're losing that. And citizen journalism is fantastic. It's a great addition. We would only have the official version of what happened to George Floyd, for instance. The Arab Spring wouldn't have happened. So this is a great addition, but it's not a replacement, because there's got to be that one person at least walking the State House, checking in. They've got a beat. That's their job. They're there 40 hours a week. And I think we don't really disagree with that. The idea is, how do we get people to get engaged with it? And my argument is, more than, yes, there needs to be better storytelling, different platforms, obviously, than we used to have, but there still has to be a step from the people in a democratic country, participants in a democracy, towards the news, towards going, maybe I'm not going to be super entertained by this, right? Maybe I'm not going to laugh, but it seems like it's important. And I argue it. I doubt it's going to work, but that's, I firmly believe that. And I love to be entertained, Again, I love the Daily Show. And
let's
John
talk
Oliver
about, I don't think there's anything wrong with getting your news from the Daily Show. I think they
do.
Yeah, well,
they don't like it.
They're going to have to accept the responsibility that they are giving the news to a lot of people who are not getting it anywhere else. And I think that I always think that comedians are especially intelligent people. You have to be smart to be funny. I think
the canaries in the coal mine, kind of.
And yeah, well, right. And they're the ones who they get laughs by speaking the truth. Because that's what's really funny when you say, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? Kind of jokes. You have to say, well, something really terrible happened. Okay, so I don't think there's anything wrong with the news being entertaining, but I want to get back to the provenance thing and make it a very simple thing that people can do. Here's how I do it. As somebody who consumes a lot of news, I like news. I find it very entertaining. But I'm like you. I will dive deep and I'll read into things and stuff like that. But I think there's a simple way that I test things. And the way that I do it is I look at the person who is the writer, or the person on TV or online, who is the reporter who's giving the information. And I trust them if I can verify over time that what they have told me has tended to be borne out. So if I follow someone on, so let's say, Under the Desk News, which is a TikTok account. I don't know if you've heard of her. And she literally started just reporting the news with the little earplug thing. She would get underneath her desk at work and start, And I trust her because she has come on and said, here's what's happening today. Here's what happened today. And she has been correct. So then what the second step is that I look for, are there multiple other news accounts that are not like the ones that I follow, that can confirm, even if they confirm in a way that isn't like, hey, this is the big truth. Like, for example, if I see something on MSNBC, like, NATO says that they're going to go to war against Russia, I'm going to jump over to Fox News and see what they say, because the conflict between these two voices helps me to decide whether things are true or not. Then I think knowing that we're being manipulated in order to view something and understanding that my eyeballs give people money, right? So
Right.
that then I have to decide whether they get to use my eyeballs. So I just canceled Facebook and Instagram. I don't feel like there's any value anymore on being on there. I don't get value from what I see. I don't get value from what I'm putting out there. It's very complicated to cancel Facebook and Instagram. If anyone's ever tried to do it, it probably took me a half an hour of going in circles because they have
don't want you to.
really made it very, very difficult. If you're older or you're very young or you don't have time or you get confused very easily, you are not canceling your Facebook or Instagram accounts. They have blocked you from doing it by making it excessively complicated. So those are kind of the tips that I think are really important. And I think what you're talking about is this kind of grander historical perspective around journalism. And here's a question for you. Where do you think journalism's going to be in, let's say, 10 years?
Over in my living room. It'll be that small. It'll fit in my living room. Yeah, they'll be sitting on the couch going, "Hey man, we're unemployed. Can bring some more chips."
All right.
Let me know the beer and chip. We're watching the Daily Show. I think, well, this is a discussion that is prominent in journalism circles. The biggest fear is that we're losing local journalism. The New York Times, the Associated Press, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, they're all going to survive. They may do some staff cuts, but they'll be there. They're not going to vanish. We can argue about whether they're going to be any good or not, et cetera. But the real issue is local news. What do you call when nobody runs against you?
Unopposed.
Unopposed. Thank you. All these people who were running unopposed, and he showed them on film talking in their state houses, and they were overtly racist or completely bananas, were totally corrupt, but nobody was covering that, right? There are fewer and fewer state house reporters, and the internet has not stepped in. Citizen journalism has not really stepped in enough to fill the void lost by all the reporters from these old legacy media outlets. So that's a big concern, because as David Simon, the writer of The Wire and several other TV shows, who was a reporter for decades, he said this is a few years ago, but it still applies. When I see a Huffington Post reporter at a Baltimore zoning board meeting, is the day that I'll feel that we're okay.
Yeah.
Internet-wise. Because it's a boring thing, but that's where the corruption starts. The zoning board meeting. That's like a massive place for corruption. So that local issue is a big concern. In terms of platform, one of the things that I didn't kind of finish my thought earlier was when I talked about old school transparency, sourcing the story within the story. Today, digital transparency means here's my bias. I am an activist, for Latino rights, right? And here's the story I'm writing. And I am upfront. I'm cherry picking, or not cherry picking, that's such a negative connotation, but these are the facts to bolster my point. It's more like an op-ed writing. Sorry? Yeah, it's more like op-ed writing. Yeah. And it's like, that's the new, in the digital journalism world, transparency has a new meaning. It's openness about my bias. And so I think younger people are drawn to that because, now I know where they're coming from. But then you're in a situation, and I think that's probably where we're going, since you asked, where we're headed, is much more of a sort of individuals doing their own reporting and hopefully reporting rather than just commenting on the news, doing their own reporting and saying up front, here's what I'm reporting on and here's what I believe. And, I'm a progressive or I'm a conservative. And losing the idea that we have this mass area where we can all agree because of objectivity. And that's a movement in some journalism circles to just get rid of the idea of objectivity and have everybody have their partisan viewpoint right up front. So, this is Fox News. Well, we know that now, being our age, Fox is conservative, Doesn't mean they're fact-free, but it's conservative. And MSNBC is liberal. And we know, doesn't mean they're fact-free either, right? They're going to choose the facts that are most conducive to their argument. And so they're kind of acting in this way already, and that's why I kind of prefer AP. The AP newsletter is something I get every day because I know that's just the news. That's as close as you're going to get to objectivity.
Yeah, because
that's why they exist.
Reporter, like you said, at the place where things are happening. So they're like, so it happened. Yeah.
Well, and one of the issues though is like most of what you see on like the big influencers are commenting on the news. And they're not doing any reporting. They're commenting on it, which is great. We should have that. But it's not reporting. And that's people take that as news, and they're like, they're not necessarily sourcing their material, the influencers. And it was, I remember during the election, what's his name went on with the Three Bros or whatever they're called. I don't know what the show is, but, they were talking about current events and stuff like this. And they're obviously, he wouldn't have been on that show if they weren't, in his corner, as it were. And then Kamala went to somebody's podcast. I'm not a big podcast person, as you can probably tell.
Ask Your Daddy, I think it is.
Yeah. And so, she hadn't doing a reporting, but they watch the news and they comment on it. And that's great. That's fine. But it's not reporting. Somebody has to do the reporting.
Yeah.
And that's what's vanishing.
So no difference.
Because there's no money there. Because Elon and Zuckerberg are taking all the money, and the Google guys. California has passed that law a year or two ago that they have a fund now that Google has to pay into to pay local journalism. And it's so small that local journalists are like, what's the point? But Canada did it, and Australia did it too. So hopefully that will be a savior for these reporter.
Yeah. Well, I think it's all important. And I think that everybody has to find the way in which they want to consume the news. And, you talked about trust, be trust at some level, but verify. And I think verification takes time. It takes follow somebody. Don't go act on what that person has said until you've had an opportunity to really test whether they are trustworthy. I always say if somebody is making money off of it being true, that's what you're looking for. If somebody's making money off of, are you clicking? Then that's not necessarily, and that's what you're talking about, the difference between the New York Times, for example. But the New York Times is no longer necessarily making money off of news. They're making money off of people going for their games, right? They want it. They subscribe because they love those games. So you just have to be smart. But I don't think you have to be somebody that researches everything. I think you can be smart about how you consume information. One of the things that I think is the most important is to think about news, the verification, the way that we think about science verification. And I got this from Yuval Harari, who is a historian who wrote a book about the modern age of information. And he said that, we live in a time where if you do not check your information and test it, just like you would a theory in science. We think that, if you take this vaccine, you're not going to get this disease. Well, then somebody's going to come and they're going to test that. Well, no, we found that actually people do get the disease even if they have the vaccine. And here's why some people get the disease when they have. So you allow yourself to get into that level, but as a consumer, it's hard for us to do that. So what we need to do is say, who is it? Can we trust this person? Does it bear out over time? Try to get news that are from the source, not necessarily. I'm just trying to, put all your stuff together. Try to get news that's from the source, not as a repackaged thing that's there to send to earn money for somebody. Understand where the money is coming from that source. Are they being paid because they're accurate? Or are they being paid because they outrage you? Or do they have other motives like getting you to vote a certain way? Um, and then I think that the citizen journalism thing is going to get bigger and bigger. And I've read that local news has actually had an upturn lately because of this citizen journalism. And I could get the Patch or the Next Door and all that. All of that is basically local news,
invested
right?
a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah. But you have to be really aware, is this local news coming from someone who, wants to create problems in the neighborhood? And you got to do that testing again. But I think what I want to leave people with is we can't, it doesn't have to be that complicated to figure out what the truth is. And I think once you know that people are trying to manipulate you for you to either buy something, act a certain way, vote a certain way, then you can start to parse out where you're getting the news from. And if your news is always making you angry and you recognize that, then you're getting your news from the wrong source, whether that's MSNBC or Fox News or, your local Next Door. Turn it off and find news that can be entertaining but doesn't make you angry.
Let me give you like 3 things that I would say.
Thanks.
One is to even on feeds or on an app, news app, or on a news website, look for neutral headlines, neutral sounding headlines.
Yeah.
If the headline is getting you pissed off before you've even looked at the story, it's a form of clickbait, basically, right?
Right.
So try and find neutrality. The second thing is I would recommend, and I wish nobody's going to do this, but maybe hopefully somebody will, is to go to the Society for Professional Journalists website and look at the ethics page, the standards for what journalism is. Because as I tell my students, everybody's got an opinion about journalism and almost nobody knows how it works. Our long history in this country.
Put it up here so people can see.
I think it's spj.com or SJP. Can't remember right now. And the third thing is, and I really mean this, subscribe, it's free, to the Associated Press Newswire for 1 month or maybe a week, and just read the news. Don't read the stories, read the newsletter, because you're going to see a bunch of neutral headlines and the first sentence, you'll get there's 2 things that happen. One is you'll see, the idea of neutrality for the most part, but you'll also have ambient engagement with the news. In other words, these are the important stories that journalists think are important, right? Now, if you believe that, a Jewish space laser caused the fires, you're going to be unhappy with the AP Newswire too. Yeah.
I just pulled it up because I get it every morning. I get it in the morning and I get it in the afternoon and get it in the evening. And it's an email. And it's already just headline, facts. This one is about key moments from Pete Hegseth's confirmation hearing. And it's a couple paragraphs. Even and it's like you said, people who were actually there. They're just telling you this is what happened when I was there.
Yeah. AP was founded in 1848 as a way as a wire service they came to the conclusion to make money that we want to go right down the middle so that newspapers on the left and newspapers on the right buy our product. That's how objectivity got started. We want to make more money. It was literally another money-making thing, right? They're not really in that position anymore because there's so much news out there, but that was their sort of, raison d'etre at the very beginning.
They lose money if they are wrong. They make more money if they are right. And that's what you look for. Are they going to make more money by being correct in the long term over time, verifiably correct in their information that they're giving you? Will they lose money if they're being incorrect in the information they're giving you?
Last thing I want to say, when you hear a politician of any side say, hey, that's fake news, go look and see if it really is. Richard Nixon in Watergate, for a year, he said, the Washington Post, oh, you guys, fake news daily. They tried to make the reporters the story. These guys are biased. All turned out to be true.
Yeah.
So, it took a long time to unravel, but, sometimes stories take a long time. So, while I just engage with the news every day, on some level, small level. You know, I mean, and I know it's a bummer. You know, I doom scroll and I just like, I need a few days off. And I still see the AP Newswire. I know what's happening. I land on the Times page, but I don't necessarily read everything or watch everything.
No, you don't have to. Yeah.
No. You should take mental health breaks.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
Thanks for listening. We hope you'll subscribe for weekly podcasts about building personal strength, mental resilience, and emotional balance. You can also find free tools, resources, and quizzes at bbgtv.org. That's bbgtv.org.